2022 was a crazy time for lumber prices. At the beginning of the year, prices were over $1,100 per thousand board feet, which translated to $8 or more for an 8-foot 2x4. Prices have dropped by over 65% since then, and lumber futures are currently lower than the pre-COVID average price. But what's going to happen in 2023? Are we going to see wild swings again? Stick around and I'll tell you. High lumber prices impact a lot of things. It can impact the cost of furniture and shipping, but more than anything, it impacts the cost of home repairs and new home construction. The National Association of Builders estimated that the increased lumber costs in 2022 added around $36,000 more to the cost of building an average home in the US. Since then, however, lumber prices have crashed, and the cost of a 2x4 sits at around $3.25 in most parts of the country. To understand what happens next, we need to understand what factors impact lumber prices. Like everything else, lumber is governed by the laws of supply and demand.
It's supply and demand. It's the foundation of our entire economy, Paul.
When I studied economics in college, we used these demand curves, and it's a great help in understanding the relationship between supply and demand. So when demand is high, prices go up until production can also go up to meet that demand. When supply is low, then prices will also go up until more supply is available. During the pandemic, lumber prices were being impacted by both higher demand and lower supplies, which is what led to the skyrocketing prices in the first place. To predict what will happen in the future, we have to understand what is going to happen with both lumber demand and lumber supply. Let's first start with supply. Most softwood lumber, or the lumber used to build homes in the US, comes from the South or from the Pacific Northwest. About 30% of our lumber is imported, most of which comes from Canada. Most lumber gets to where it's going via rail, and a lot of the logistical challenges that we saw during the pandemic had to do with getting lumber from where it's produced to where it's consumed. Most of those issues have been worked out now, and barring any unforeseen rail strikes or something like that, I don't expect to see similar challenges in 2023. Now let's talk about lumber companies for just a second. Most lumber companies made a fortune over the past 2 years, and they've spent some of that money on modernizing their mills. They've been buying new equipment and trying to become more efficient. That's great news for the future. There is a flip side, however. Lumber executives know that lumber is a cyclical business, and we're headed for a downturn right now. They have huge cash reserves, and they can afford to not produce lumber if prices drop too low to the point where it costs more to run their mill than they can make from selling lumber. They call that curtailments. What that means is if prices are too low, lumber mills will simply not produce lumber until the supply is constrained and prices move up to the point where they can make a profit again. What that means for prices is that there is a floor below which prices will not dip. Where that is really anyone's guess, and it'll be different for each company, but it's definitely there. So what does that mean for the future? Well, I don't think that we're going to see any of the same supply difficulties in 2023 that we saw in previous years, but that of course is again barring some unforeseen major event. So let's move on to demand. By far the biggest demand for lumber in the US comes from new home construction. And so to understand where lumber is going next year, we have to understand where housing is going. So let's take a look. Home prices have increased by 40% since the start of the pandemic, with the median home price in the US going from $327,000 in 2019 to $455,000 in 2022. Average salaries have not kept up with that increase in costs. Added to that, interest rates have doubled over the past year and are currently sitting at around 6 or 7%. And most people think that more increases are coming. So if we compare the cost of a home before the pandemic to now, we can see that for the average home, a person would have to pay a monthly mortgage that is over $1,500 higher for the same house. Most people can't afford that kind of increase. And that is what has led to the huge decrease in demand for housing. And you can see that in the data. Existing home sales are down. New housing starts are lower, and people generally are staying put. In fact, if you're a homeowner, ask yourself, Could you afford to buy the home that you live in now if you didn't already own it? According to a recent survey by the Cato Institute, 55% of US homeowners say that they could not raise the necessary funds to purchase their home at current prices and interest rates. In the past, homeowners saw rising home prices as a point of pride and a sign of growing wealth, but today, 87% of Americans are concerned about rising home prices and not really proud. So demand for housing is down and new home construction is down. That combined with healthy lumber supplies means that lumber prices in the short term will stay low. In fact, I predict that the current trend of lower lumber prices will last throughout this year. And while that's good news, there is a caveat. According to a recent Pew Research survey, over 52% of young adults ages 18 to 29 live with their parents. Those are the largest figures since the Great Depression. Now tell me, when is it that most people buy their first home? It's in their 20s. And what is it that these young adults are doing? Well, many of them are saving up money to buy a house. So when rates start to come down, I predict that we are going to see huge demand for new homes. And the problem is that we're not building enough. And when that building frenzy starts, you're going to see lumber prices go crazy again. Now, like I said before, I don't think that will happen this year, and it probably won't even happen next year. But before the pandemic and the crazy housing market and the huge home price increases, there was data suggesting that in the US, we had a shortage of 3.8 million homes. That really hasn't changed. In fact, it's only gotten worse. So where are lumber prices going this year? They are really going to stay steady and may even fall a little bit more than they already have. That is assuming that current trends continue and then there's not any huge disruptions in the market. But remember that there is a looming tsunami that is just waiting to hit when the time is right. Demand for housing will skyrocket in the future once interest rates and/or home prices come down a bit. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.